Xenogears is an ambitious masterpiece. Xenogears is a train wreck disaster, but it is a beautiful disaster. Tetsuya Takahashi and his wife, Keiro Tanaka, first pitched the idea for Xenogears to Square as Final Fantasy VII, but the game's themes were thought to be too complex for a mainline title. Instead, Square assigned them a small budget and a team to program and release the game as a standalone IP. Square was feeling especially adventurous in those days, releasing several games like this around the time that would go on to become cult classics. Xenogears is definitely that and more. It was my junior year in high school. Growing up, my family had been traditionally a Nintendo household, but my mom always had a pulse on what was popular, and in 1998 picked up a PlayStation. With my shiny new console, I only had a few games at first: Gex, Enter the Gecko, Spider-Man, and Gran Turismo 2. But my cousin had lots of games for his PlayStation, and one day he came over with his collection. We played through them in an afternoon or so. That way I could try out a few of them and see what I would like to purchase for myself. When he left that day, he forgot one of them. And when I asked him about it the next day, he claimed that he had no idea what I was talking about. To this day, I don't know exactly how this game got into my house. It did not look like a game that I had ever seen before. It looked kind of like this new anime stuff I was starting to see on Cartoon Network. I put it in the console and started a new game. I had never seen anything like this before. I missed out on Final Fantasy VII. This was the very first JRPG I had ever played, and at the time I had never even heard of the phrase Japanese RPG before. I played platform games and racing games, but this was new, this was different, this was amazing, and I loved it. I'd play until I got stuck, not realize I didn't have the proper gear, and, well, didn't buy stuff for my gears, and I wound up starting the game over. I didn't mind. I loved the game so much that I actually restarted and replayed sections of it multiple times. Each time I'd get a little further, push a little deeper into the story, and see more and more of the game's world. I opened the case, put the second disc in for the first time, and nothing happened. For years, I would put disc 1 in, play through it to the end, insert disc 2, and hope something would have changed. I'd bought a disc resurfacer, tried to clean the disc, didn't work, tried to find another copy of the game, all to no avail. Eventually, I gave up and did what a lot of people do. I traded it into EB Games for another game. Years went by. I grew up, got older, but in the back of my mind, I would occasionally wonder, what's on disc 2? My wife bought me a PlayStation Portable in 2011 as a birthday present, and I was introduced to the PlayStation Store, a treasure trove of downloadable titles, one of which caught my attention. Xenogears, $9.99. I blitzed through disc 1. It was everything I remembered it being, and even more. I hit disc 2, swapped, and Xenogears' struggles are pretty well documented. The short version is Takahashi was given 2 years to develop the game, but most of the more experienced developers were already working on Final Fantasy VII. The team tasked with the game was not inexperienced per se, but building a 3D game was brand new to everybody in that time period. The team was made up initially of about 30 developers, and as the game's scope grew, it became more and more complex for the team to implement. The story and concept were well established from the very first pitch, but reconceptualized multiple times. More fantasy-based initially, and moving slowly to science fiction-based theming as the game progressed. A year and a half into the process development, and the game had only been completed up to the end of Disc 1. It just wasn't ready. Square stepped in and suggested they simply ship what they had ready to go, and if the game did well, they would greenlight a sequel. Takahashi thought this was unwise, as the story up to the end Disc 1 was far from wrapping up in a satisfying manner. With only half a year to finish the game, the much compromised second disc was put together, with a vastly different presentation than the first. This led to the infamous chair sequences. The team worked around the clock, moving into the studio to get the game ready and out the door on time. And despite the clearly compromised vision, the game hit stores and my personal console in 1998. The opening of the story shows the takeover and destruction of a massive spacecraft, with words "I am the Alpha and the Omega" text crawl. You instantly are made aware of the scope of this story. This is about to get biblical in proportions. "You shall be as gods." The serpent's lie scrolls across the screen, and the lonely captain sits staring at his wife and daughter in a locket before initiating the ship's destruction. There are so many little details in this intro that will be important to the story later, and they are easy to forget about by the time you reach them. In the end, though, it's worth rewatching this scene after you've beat the game for further context. Amidst the destruction from the crashed ship, a lone woman stands in the elements, and then the screen goes black. From here, you're introduced via long text scroll to the world of Xenogears proper. Place names, political factions, religious organizations, and more. The scroll of text is contentious for me. For one, I feel all this information is relayed more naturally, very quickly on in the story, and putting it all here in the beginning just makes it so much harder to glean anything useful from it. Especially considering it does not directly relate in any way to what we just witnessed. We lack, as an audience, proper context to process this information, and there is too much of it in order to be able to properly take it in. After this text scroll, we're immediately thrown back into a new disaster. A village being destroyed, a desperate struggle, fire and blood everywhere, and then once again swapping from that to a painting scene. This is Fei Fong Wong, and he does not remember much. At 15, he was brought into the village badly injured by a masked man who charged the village elder with caring for him. The last 3 years, Fei has built a life for himself here. He has friends, family. Timothy, Alice, Dan, and Saiton are his immediate circle of influence. But in general, he is surrounded by friendly faces that I am sure nothing bad will happen to. After a brief introduction to the game's world where we travel around between the village and Saitan's house and then back to the village, we catch up to the intro. Not the first intro, the third intro. Fourth intro? One of the beginning intros. The one where the village is getting destroyed. Faye jumps into his gear under mysterious circumstances and tries to save the village, but when Timothy is killed, a white light pours from his gear, consuming the enemies, the village, and many of the villagers, including Alice. Faye's peaceful life ends that day. Exiled from the village and hated by Dan, Faye flees to Ava, the opposing force from those likely pursuing him, and the game begins in earnest. From here, Disc 1 follows an escalating pattern. Faye arrives, usually followed closely by Saitan. Faye makes progress towards some immediate goal. Bad things happen. We wonder how they could possibly get worse. They get worse. Faye takes a nap, wakes up, and starts all over again. The pattern is colored by a longer period of progress followed by higher stakes, and ergo, larger disasters. Most of these cycles will introduce new environments, bits of lore, and new characters to keep up with, including the game's myriad of villains. This game seriously has too many villains, but we can circle back to that later. In essence, the stakes start out very personal for Faye, but don't worry, less than an hour later in the game, people will start showing up and talking about killing God. I'm glossing over a lot here, obviously, but what Xenogears' story is ambitious, almost to the point of being beyond what the medium can accommodate, even under the best of circumstances. And oh boy, does this game know how to spin a yarn. By the time you reach the second disc, you still have no clue how this is all going to be resolved, which is why I do think that shipping just Disc 1 would have been a mistake. By the end, all these loose ends are tied up, somewhat suboptimally, in the second disc. When you beat the game, you get this little message that says Part 5. Like, geez, is there more? That said, considering all the difficulties, the limitations, and even the final product, Xenogears shows some truly brilliant storytelling at times. The cinematography on display is quite impressive considering the medium, the hardware, and the level of experience developers had in telling a story in 3D space. There are immersive lighting effects and block camera movement that give an in-game cutscene an impressive amount of polish. Xenogears uses 3D geometry and textures to create the environment and some of the larger models like gears and certain bosses. However, characters are sprites, and the sprite sheets are enormous, even for minor characters. The only other game on this hardware I can think of with a comparable presentation would be something like Breath of Fire 4. There is a little of the texture mapping glitches that sometimes occur on the PlayStation 1 hardware, but overall it's programmed beautifully and quite impressively considering the quality of some of these textures. Sophia's painting in the cathedral is a great example. This is a large, unbroken, single texture and very important scene, and it does not jitter very much, even though the camera moves around for cinematic effect. For anyone aware of the architecture of the PlayStation, or just someone who has played the games on the console, you're likely at least somewhat aware of the challenges. But Xenogears rarely stutters in this department. While there are a few pre-rendered backgrounds and assets, they are very high quality and hold up well on modern displays, especially with scan lines. Sprites are very expressive, and characters have bespoke animations that fit their personalities. Most of the cast, even a great deal of NPCs, have character portraits that show up with their dialogue. Main characters get several portraits to express their feelings in any given moment, informing the player of the intent of lines without voice acting. There is some voice acting, but it is largely reserved for cutscenes and used sparingly.
Katinayu tat vadaintuna akva. Valnarantak. Rana kalti. Throw down your weapon. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
I like the captain's voice in the opening cutscene. He sounds like James Garner.
Captain!
Cut off the cables manually.
Not all of it is great, mind you, but it's far better than the average for the time. There are two main battle systems with a couple of one-offs to spice up the gameplay. The first type is on foot battles. Characters are assigned a pool of AP from which to choose attacks. Lighter attacks are cheaper and high accuracy, but are weaker. Heavy attacks are more expensive and deal more damage, but the accuracy is much lower. Any AP you do not spend can be banked for a future round. As the game progresses, characters unlock special attacks called death blows. These combinations can deal big damage, but use a large amount of AP. If you're frugal and bank enough AP, you can eventually stack death blows. Death blows are learned by performing combos and gathering an EXP-like resource each time you use that combination. Think of it kind of like additions in Panzer Dragoon, except not as good. Unless you know the combinations, you have to sort of experiment until you learn new ones, and because using the combo does not result in a death blow until you learn it, you wind up farming weaker enemies for death blows and using learned death blows exclusively for boss fights and more difficult encounters. This diversity increases as the game progresses, and some bosses and enemies challenge the player to try different tactics. Each character also has access to ether abilities. There is offensive and defensive abilities, and their effectiveness is largely tied to individual party member stats and also their equipment. For the longest time, I thought the ether was only useful for status effect casting and healing, but if Ellie has the right equipment, you can really dish out some punishment with her spells. Multiple characters can heal, some more effectively than others, and of course, other standard battle options are present, like run, items, and defense. The player can use many options to stay ahead in battle or grind until they are too strong to need them. That said, grinding is rarely necessary in order to progress if you have the right equipment. You need money more than you need experience in this game. Or at least that's been my personal experience. The second main type is gear combat. Gear combat is much the same as regular combat, except you have a limited amount of fuel to work with. If you run out of fuel, you may as well reset your console and hope your last save was not more than an hour ago. The same rules apply here for attacks as in on-foot combat, but death blows function slightly differently. After each turn, you build AP, which can be used to chain attacks in the next round. Characters' ether abilities carry over from on-foot combat, but you also have an options command. Each character can gain different options in their slot that are tied to who they are as a character. There is no items command, so equipping items to increase your options for healing and restoring fuel is a must. The charge command allows you to recover fuel in battle, but it's barely worth using without equipment to increase its effectiveness. Do not underestimate buying equipment for your gears. It can mean the difference between a win and a lose, and honestly, most of the money you get should probably go towards your gears. One more command is the boost command. This command works much like haste, but burns through fuel liberally. That said, most enemies in this game can simply outdamage you for most of the run, so having the ability to haste to make up the difference becomes necessary in most boss fights. Knowing when to use these commands and equipment will require a little strategy and indeed some trial and error, but once you have a setup that works for you, it can be very satisfying to pull it all off. From here out, there will be heavy spoilers. So I'm going to try and give a summary of the story in as few words as possible here. Just thinking about attempting this has my hands sweating on the keyboard. And yes, when this section is finished, I did do my best to be brief. This story is just enormous. There have been whole books written about it. Okay, here we go. Fade leaves the village and goes into the forest where he meets Ellie. Ellie is the pilot for Gebler, a Solarian military force that we'll circle back to later. Ellie and Faye have an immediate connection that is deeper than the trope love at first sight, but it's not explained at this point. Faye saves her twice because she keeps getting knocked out by things. Turns out Ellie is one of the pilots who brought Weltall, a special gear, to the village of Leyhan because it was special and she was sent there to steal it from Kislev. Kislev and Ava have been at war for hundreds of years, but only recently gears started appearing on both sides. Faye climbed into Weltall and nuked his hometown, and Ellie sucks at taking any responsibility, and Faye is understandably a bit broken by the trauma of the experience. Citan shows up while Faye is fighting a dinosaur to save Ellie and brings Weltall. Faye is forced to get back in the saddle and saves her, but breaks his gear. Citan tells Ellie to leave in the night, and she does. but Faye wakes up and shows that he is smarter than the average 3-year-old and forgives her, showing a strange amount of maturity, further hinting at his deeper connections with Ellie. Citan and Faye fight their way on to Tatooine and meet Han Solo at the local establishment, but he's pretty useless here. Citan needs parts for Weltall, so he leaves Faye to go find them in the desert. Faye wanders into the desert alone and has an experience I can only describe as an acid trip before Citan mysteriously finds him again in the nick of time. The evil mech guy from the village shows up and tells Faye it is his fate to slay God before peacing out and leaving a sandworm for us to deal with. His name is Graf, by the way, and this cutscene is awesome. Faye can't catch a break and gets captured. Citan does some scheming and suddenly pirates. Then, Faye and the pirate captain fall into a hole. This is Bart, by the way, and he is the best character in the game. Bart and Faye work together to escape and run into an old man named Balthazar, who does not believe in evolution. Also, Faye's mech scares him and he tries to kill us, but we kill him instead, or not. Honestly, it's really confusing because he just shows up later in the story again. And by later, I mean like much later, like second disc later. Turns out Bart is supposed to be the king of Ava. Right when his father was about to make peace with Kislev, he was assassinated and Bart was held prisoner with other members of the royal family. Bart was rescued by Sigurd and Mason, and the three of them run a band of sand pirates fighting Shakan and planning to retake the throne. Bart asks Faye to help. Faye does what any sensible person would do considering the horrors he has witnessed and says no. But he and Bart come to an understanding and Faye decides it's better to help than to do nothing. They head to the capital together and hatch a plan to rescue Margie, Bart's fiancée, who is held captive as a hostage and as an asset. She has a jewel called the Fatima Jasper. What is that? We don't know. But we know Shakan can't have it, and we can't take Ava back if he has Margie as a hostage. The plan is for Bart to sneak into the sewers while Faye makes a big show at the fighting tournament, conveniently happening at the same time. Also, Dan is here. You can either choose to beat up this traumatized child or refuse to fight him. Either way, Faye advances while Bart sneaks around. Faye also meets this guy. Who is this guy? We don't know yet, but he is mysterious and impossible to beat. Like Dan, he just leaves, which only enforces Faye's growing imposter syndrome. Bart and Faye rescue Margie. Somehow Faye just shows up, but we're all caught by Gebler goons, Ramses and Myong. Who are they? We don't know. Ramses notices Faye fights like the demon of Elaru. Who is that? We don't know. We manage to escape with Ellie's help and head for Nisan. Margie is the holy mother of the Church of Nisan and also Bart's fiancé. And his cousin. Anyway, Margie shows us around the Church of Nisan and we find an unfinished painting of the church's founder, Sophia. Who is Sophia? Why does she look like Ellie? What's with this flashback? What does the cross symbol mean? I have no idea. We head back to the inn, and Bart has some questions for Sigurd. Sigurd and Citan have a suspicious amount of knowledge about Ramses and Gebler. Sigurd and Citan explain that Gebler is a military force from Solaris. Solarians rule from the shadows high above the surface and see themselves as superior to the surface dwellers. They are the shepherds, and the people below are the lambs. They control the lambs through politics, war, slavery, brainwashing, and more. And Sigurd was a lamb who was kidnapped and brainwashed, while Citan was a Solarian citizen, though lower class. They both followed Ramses until they grew disillusioned with Solaris' totalitarian reign and fled. Sigurd came down to help Bart, and Citan doesn't really explain what he's doing. Satisfied, for now, Bart and the others come up with a plan to take back Ava. It's a horrible plan, and fails spectacularly. Faye is on his own, fighting Ellie and her unit, while Bart and the others try to sneak back into the capital the same way they did before. It is literally the same plan, and they really think that they would fall for it twice. Mason shows up and rescues Bart, but if he could do that all along, then how come they needed the elaborate plan to save Margie in the first place? Couldn't Mason just have dropped in and murdered Shakan while he was out for a walk? I mean, this scene is funny, but it's also kind of dumb. Faye beats Ellie even though she amps up on monster drinks and gets edgy. Turns out Ellie has some inner demons like Faye, and they come out when she uses Drive, which is sort of an in-universe performance enhancer that appears here and then never appears again. I hear it's a common problem. Anyway, Faye and Ellie have a heart-to-heart before Faye moves on to his real target, this generic Crossface General. Graf shows up and gives Crossface General, who I can't remember his name, power, and Faye's unit is wiped out and he blacks out. Meanwhile, back with Bart, he is surrounded by Shakan and Ramses, and just when things can't get worse, a red mech shows up and wrecks everybody. I mean, everybody. The red mech is about to finish off Bart when Sigurd drops the sand sub on top of him, and of course everyone lives happily ever... Wait, what's that sound? Who is this guy? What happened to everyone? Who is playing the organ now? What is going on? You know, I just can't...